أكبر الله أكبر الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم.
As the Muslim holy month of Ramadan begins, the expected ceasefire in Gaza is still elusive. US President Joe Biden has asserted that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was hurting Israel more than helping Israel. This was in the context of the Israeli Prime Minister being obstinate about the details of the ceasefire deal. In turn, Netanyahu has dismissed Biden's contention as wrong. This now escalates what is a public disagreement between the leaders of US and Israel. Netanyahu, in an interview with Politico, challenged Biden's assessment of Israel's military strategy in the Gaza war. He said that his policies represented the overwhelming majority of Israelis. This is what Netanyahu said, and I quote, "I do not know exactly what the president meant, but if he meant that I'm pursuing private policies against the wish of the majority, then the wish of the majority of Israelis, and that this is hurting the interests of Israel, then the president is wrong on both counts," unquote. An excerpt from that interview was released by the office of the Israeli Prime Minister. But before that, over the weekend, Joe Biden had chastised Netanyahu over the rising civilian death toll in Gaza. At the same time, he also reaffirmed American support for Israel. Biden said that Netanyahu had a right to defend Israel, a right to continue to pursue Hamas, but that he must pay more attention to innocent lives that are being lost as a consequence of the actions taken so far. Biden went on to say that in his view, Netanyahu's policies are hurting Israel much more than helping Israel. He said it is contrary to what Israel stands for and called it a big mistake. And that's why he said he wants to see a ceasefire.
He has a right to defend Israel, a right to continue to pursue Hamas, but he must pay more attention to the innocent lives being lost as a consequence of the actions taken. He's hurting, in my view, he's hurting Israel more than helping Israel by making the rest of the world, it's contrary to what Israel stands for. And I think it's a big mistake. So I want to see a ceasefire. And I'm starting with a major exchange of prisoners for a 6-week period. We're going into Ramadan. It should be nothing happening, and we should build off of that ceasefire.
Now, this sparring comes amid mounting humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The United Nations is warning of a looming famine in the enclave, which has more than 2 million people. Health officials in Gaza over the weekend said that at least 25 people, most of them children, had died simply because of malnutrition and dehydration in the last few weeks. On Sunday, the US military said that an army vessel, the General Frank Besson, had set sail towards Gaza. It's carrying equipment to build a floating pier off the coast of Gaza. The US is hoping to deliver food aid using this pier from the sea into land in Gaza. Besson is a logistics support vessel. It's carrying the first equipment to establish a temporary pier and then deliver vital humanitarian supplies. But the Pentagon also had a word of caution. It said that this whole project of delivering aid from the sea could take weeks to complete. The Biden administration's plan for a pier and a causeway was announced last week. The US is hoping that eventually this sea route will be able to deliver as much as 2 million meals every single day for the residents of Gaza. Some humanitarian officials, though, have criticized this approach. They say that delivering aid by trucks or by a convoy of trucks is far more efficient. American officials do acknowledge that deliveries by sea as well as airdrops, which they've done about 4 or 5 of them since the last couple of weeks, those are not as effective as the overland delivery of food. But Israel, of course, has greatly limited aid entering Gaza. The Pentagon also said that one of the main military units that is involved in the construction of the floating pier will be the Army's 7th Transportation Brigade, and that about 1,000 American service members will be working to complete this pier. The Israeli military will also coordinate in the installation of the pier. This was confirmed by a spokesman for the Israeli military, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari. Shipments will be first inspected by Israeli troops before they are handed off to the aid groups who will then distribute these supplies. The start of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan usually brings a time of religious devotion. Muslims across the world take part in fasting from dawn to dusk. There are also family gatherings and nightly feasts. But in Gaza, after 5 months of this war, all of that seems like a distant dream, something that is not a reality for ordinary Gazans. According to the Gazan Health Ministry, an estimated 30,000 plus Palestinians have been killed since this operation began in October. On the 7th of October, a Hamas-led attack on Israel killed about 1,200 Israelis. Meanwhile, the international authorities are hoping to reach a ceasefire before Ramadan. Those hopes were completely dashed over the weekend. And this happened because Hamas is repeating its demand for a comprehensive ceasefire. Israel is not willing to accept a full stop in this war. Egypt, Qatar, and the United States had sought to broker a truce between Israel and Hamas. They wanted to do that before the start of Ramadan. In fact, Joe Biden was on record that he is certain that there will be a ceasefire before the 10th of March when Ramadan began. There had been optimism for a last-minute deal that would allow for the release of some Israeli hostages who were held in Gaza. In return, the Palestinians would get some of their folks who were held in Israeli prisons, some of them for heinous crimes. But weeks of indirect negotiations completely fell through over the weekend, and that in turn led a top Hamas political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, who went on television, and in a speech on Sunday he said that Hamas wanted the agreement that would end the war. They wanted a guarantee of the complete withdrawal of all Israeli forces from Gaza, and they also want all displaced Palestinians to return to their homes, whether in the West Bank or in Gaza. Back on Friday, David Barnea, who is the chief of Mossad, which is Israel's intelligence agency, met with the CIA director William Burns. The effort was to try and advance and to try and push through a deal that would release hostages. The Mossad accused Hamas of trying to inflame the region. They said that Hamas is only interested in political survival, even at the expense of the residents of Gaza. But all sides were hoping that a ceasefire would come to pass. That was not to be. But now, with fighting happening in the holy month of Ramadan, that would only further alienate Israel, particularly in the Muslim world. There have been clashes in the holy month of Ramadan between Israel and Palestinians, most notably back in 1967 in the Arab-Israeli War. At that time, Israel was challenged by both Egypt as well as Syria. It's a war that Israel won. But given the current context and given the current war, 5 months plus of relentless aerial and ground bombardment, and the fact that the civilian toll has reached 30,000 plus, much to the dismay of not just Israel's critics around the world and Palestinian supporters, but even Israel's friends, both in the United States as well as in Europe, that is going to put additional pressure on the Netanyahu administration. What is also clear with Biden's comments over the weekend and also the meetings that Benny Gantz, the main opposition leader, who's now part of the wartime cabinet, those meetings that he had in Washington last week, it's very clear that Biden and Netanyahu are not on the same page, and Biden perhaps has perhaps even made up his mind to let go of Netanyahu and work with an administration in Israel whose views on this war and a post-war Gaza are much more aligned with the White House than what Netanyahu's is, or for that matter, his hard-right coalition partners are.